Welcome into the Nutmeg Tavern. We are open. The doors are open. You can come on into the Nutmeg Tavern. I'm so excited to be here today. So, normally I would say we're live in the Nutmeg Tavern. Yes, this is a live stream. No, I'm not here live because, well, unfortunately, circumstances made it so that I could not be here the moment the doors are open. And so I decided that we would still have a live stream. And so you guys would still have the chat. And of course, somebody here at Townsend's will be in the chat. I might even be in the chat. Can't promise that, but I might be. But I thought what I would do is we're going to read a little bit out of Ebenezer Fox. I'm probably going to do more commentary than I am going to read, but it might be the other way around. You know, I thought I might be pop in here, but we would do this thing. So we're going to have lots of fun talking about the 18th century. Yes, I'm your host, John Townsend, and the 18th century is what we talk about here in the Nutmeg Tavern. Because we're on this side of the time vortex, you're on that side, and there is a time vortex today. I mean, wow. Here, I talked about Ebenezer Fox in the past, and he's a guy who writes from the Revolutionary War time period. It's a personal memoir. He does a little kind of naval stuff here in the Revolutionary War. He is a young man, and of course, these are his sort of recollections and adventures from this time period. And we're going to be reading toward the end. He gets captured and he escapes and weird things happen to him. He has a lot of weird things happening to him. And weird things happen to him on this particular occasion. And so let's find out what's happening here. This is, I didn't want to go all the way to the beginning of chapter 13, but we're going to jump into chapter 13. He has just been kind of captive, and now he's not. So he starts off with something like this. We thought of all this and found ourselves standing erect among our own countrymen upon the deck of an American frigate. We almost doubted our personal identity. Our feelings may be more easily imagined than described. Captain Johnson received us kindly and was willing to employ us for the voyage at a compensation of $10 per month. But when my comrades were informed that the vessel was not going directly to Boston and that she would visit France first and might stay there some time, they declined engaging in her service. Two of them belonging to Connecticut, one to Rhode Island, and the other was an Irishman. They succeeded in finding a vessel that was bound to some port near home and whose voyage would be less circuitous than that of Flora. I was the only one of our little party who had suffered so much together who entered into the service of Captain Johnson. I was as anxious to get home as any of my companions, but there was a degree of safety on board of the Flora, which I could not expect on board of a merchantman. I likewise felt some desire of visiting France and entertained some hope that we might make some captures in the course of our voyage. So he is shipping on board of a man of war or a privateer. Sorry, I can't remember which. So he might actually make some real money. So $10 a month, okay, whatever. But the chance of getting $1,000 or $500 at basically for doing nothing for 12 hours, it's amazing what captures can mean to a sailor in this time period when they would get a portion of that. Even somebody who's pretty lowly. In fact, everybody on board ship would get some kind of a share. Let me find my spot there. I likewise felt some desire of visiting France, and I entertained some hope, that we might make some captures in the course of the voyage. For I had not yet rested long enough after my sufferings to cultivate the Christian spirit of forgiveness to my enemies. I felt willing to encounter the hazards of an engagement for an opportunity to pay off some old scores, which I fancied were then their due. So not only does he want to make money from a capture, but he wants a little revenge. right? And if you're shipping on board of a merchantman, you're not going to get that. I received from our noble captain 2 months' wages in advance, and being destitute of everything necessary for the voyage, excepting the miserable clothes which I had wore, I was permitted to go on shore to make purchases that I thought requisite. And this is not unheard of at the time, sort of giving money ahead of time, putting it on basically account, and it'll be taken off at the end of the voyage. Because if you don't have equipment, you will not survive. As my companions had determined not to engage in the service of the Flora, but to seek for their berth on board of some other vessel, I knew that I must experience the painful task of separation from those who were endeared to me as fellow sufferers in affliction and dangers. The ties of friendship which united us were too strong to be easily broken. The circumstances which had engaged us in one common cause had caused a fraternity or fraternal feelings in our breasts too deep to feel obliterated. We concluded to grace our parting with a farewell supper. We adjourned to a public house and gave directions for a sumptuous repast. And while it was preparing, we regaled ourselves upon a few bottles of claret in order to elevate our spirits to a proper degree, that the gloomy thoughts of our separation might not allow our supper to be a melancholy one. By the time the feast was prepared, our spirits were raised to a proper state for enjoyment, and a happier and more jolly set of fellows never assembled around a table than that were there that night. Yeah, going through just super hazardous situations like you have done with these men makes them not want to separate, and when they do, they're going to celebrate in a way. They're going to, I love this. It's like, let's go to a public house and we'll tell them, in 4 or 5 hours we want a feast and it should be like this. We want a banquet, right? Prepare us this and this and this, and have it all set up, and give us our own room, which is a lot of times these public houses are set up with a kind of a standard public room, and then there are other rooms that basically you can rent. And they'll just bring things to you, and that's what they're doing there. The sufferings that we endured and the dangers we had passed were fruitful subjects for conversation. We ate and drank. He says we eat. We ate and drank till a late hour, when we rose from table, and grasping each other by the hand, and with feelings that touched our hearts, we said to each other, God bless you, and farewell. And to me this was a final farewell to my companions. From that time to the present, I have never seen one of them, nor ever heard of what became of them. Isn't that interesting that today, if we had this circumstance, we would come up with contact information, a way to, we would have social media or email addresses, telephone numbers, address, whatever. We would have some way of getting hold of people that we had this amount of connection with. And this is a common theme if you read in a lot of different books from the time period. There just wasn't any way to do that, right? The closest thing you could do is say, well, his hometown was Boston, and actually travel there and start asking around. So the idea of losing connection with people, it's just so very common in this time period, being the best friends ever, and you will never be able to search them out and find them in the future. As they were all older than myself, it is not probable that any of them are now among the living. If they were, I repeat the farewell wish, which I gave 56 years ago. God bless you. And even this idea here, this sentiment that, who knows, maybe they're going to read this book that I kind of push out there like a message bottle. It's like, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to put it in a glass bottle and float it out in the ocean. Maybe they'll pick it up. This sentiment is repeated in other books that I've read from the 18th and the 19th century. It's like, in case any of you are reading this, it's like sending that message. The next day after I had purchased what articles of clothing I thought necessary for the voyage, I went on board of the Flora and reported myself ready for duty. This ship, as I have observed, was formerly a British frigate, but after she was raised by the Americans, she was fitted out as a letter of marque and was sent by her own orders on the present voyage. So there we go. The ship is not a standard military vessel. It is a private military vessel. It is a letter of marque. So a privateersman might be another word for it, but a letter of marque is a little more polite, a little more specific, and a little less derogatory. It's private. Somebody paid for this ship, just regular people. They got permission from the government to go out and attack the enemy, specifically enemy commerce, but sometimes military, and off you go. Occasionally people talk about that today, like a president or somebody might say, yeah, we've got the ability to sort of send out private military operations on somebody. But since we never truly could declare war anymore, we just have sort of police actions. Probably there's no good legal, who knows? Anyway, with mingled feelings of happiness, gratitude, and pride, I entered into the service of my country once more and stepped with much satisfaction upon the deck of this fine ship. Captain Johnson was an excellent officer, very affable and courteous in his manners, and much beloved by his officers and crew. On a privateersman, there's not the same kind of discipline, specifically British naval discipline, where it's more like a pirate ship in that the captain is a captain only because all his men follow him, not because they're being forced. Undoubtedly, there's certainly some military discipline, but it can't be the same as it would be in a standard military ship. If anything could add to the satisfaction I experienced in finding myself on board of an American ship commanded by agreeable officers and surrounded by a crew principally of my own countrymen, it was the circumstance of finding Bostonians with whom I had formerly been partially acquainted. Among these was Mr. Nathaniel Craft of Roxbury, who afterwards died at Bordeaux; Sam G. Perkins, Esquire of Boston, then a young man and brother of the Honorable Thomas H. Perkins, distinguished for his philanthropy and benevolence. How different is the character of this last named gentleman from that of many others who have lived apparently for the sole purpose of leaving to their heirs the inheritance of a bloated fortune, to quarrel about its division, and then perhaps to dissipate in a few years what has cost their fathers the labor of a long life to accumulate. So, yeah. Of these, all that can be said is that they lived, they died, and their names have perished with them. And then there's this poem, maybe? Even 500,000 gets him no other praise. He toiled and moiled, poor muckworm, through his 80 years and 10, and when the earth shall now be shovelled on him, if that which served him for a soul were still within its husk, it would still be dirt to dirt. Having amassed a princely fortune, Mr. Perkins manifests to the benevolence of his heart in the liberal use he makes of it, not in ostentation and parade, but for the benefit of his fellow creatures. He enjoys the satisfaction of doing good and seeing the fruits of his goodness while he lives. He does not wait for his works to follow him. He has the pleasure of seeing them go before him. He does not wait for his children to raise up and call him blessed. He hears the blessings of grateful hearts and feels a consciousness of having been a faithful steward. When I pass through the Pearl Street and look upon his noble bequest, the institution for the blind, um, there's an asterisk there, and reflect upon a vast amount of happiness he has conferred upon these unfortunate beings, from whom the blessings of light have been shut, I cannot but think that he will receive a more glorious reward than he enjoys on earth. A welcome into the mansions of rest, where peace and righteousness forever reign. And then he says, like, as an aside, to return to my narrative, he actually, it's like, oh, sorry about that rabbit trail. There were lying in the port of Cape Francois, while we were there, several Spanish and French ships of war, in want of men, waiting till they could obtain their complement, with the intention of sailing in quest of the British fleet. The Sunday previous to our sailing, I, with several of the crew, obtained permission to go on shore. It was customary then in foreign ports to allow the sailors to make use of Sunday as a day of recreation. And while we were enjoying ourselves over a bottle of wine in a public house, a large press gang of Frenchmen suddenly entered and seized upon all of us, hurried us off into the boat, and, notwithstanding our protestations against this outrage upon Americans, they conveyed us on board of a French 74. Okay. We immediately made known to the captain that we belonged to the Flora and demanded to be released. He showed no disposition to comply with our demands, saying that he was in want of hands and that we should receive good pay and treatment on board of his ship as in our own. This was poor consolation for us. It was provoking as well as distressing to be thus imprisoned, as it were, in sight of our own ship. But having no communication with her, we could not give any information of our situation. We knew that the combined fleet was to sail in a few days, and although we had no objections to fighting our old enemy, the British, we yet had some choice as it respected the company we fought in, but had but little desire to obey the orders of French officers, for to mingle our blood with that of their crew, or to mingle our blood with that of their crew. My desire to get away from this ship was as great as it formerly had been to escape from the British at Kingston, and the difficulty of effecting it appeared about as formidable. It was vain to regret that I had not spent the Sabbath on board the Flora, instead of carousing at a public house on shore. My regret was sincere, and I resolved never to be guilty of such imprudence again were I once more safe on board our good ship. Of our impressed party, it consists of 4 or 5. Not one could swim except myself. We conferred together and came to the conclusion that the only chance we had for escape consisted in my attempting to swim in the night to the Flora, which lay about a quarter of a mile from the 74. I had no fear of being able to swim that distance. The only danger I apprehended was from the sharks, which were very abundant in those waters. I agreed with my companions that this appeared to be the only practical method of escape. Yeah, you go swim with the sharks. And after some urging on their part, and some flattery of the honor I should be given by accomplishment, I concluded to undertake it that night. He probably wasn't that old at that time, and so, anyway. Late at night, I went on deck, accompanied by one of my friends. Finding the sentinel asleep, which shouldn't be true, we went forward, and divesting myself of my jacket, but keeping my hat, my shirt, and trousers, not his shoes, thank goodness, I slid down by the cable quietly into the water. The cable here is just a very large rope, and struck out for the Flora. Of all the dangers to which I had been exposed in the course of my adventures, I consider this the greatest. The honor, no, not the honor, the horror of mind I experienced while swimming is indescribable. My agitation was so great that I wonder that I did not sink, though through fear of being devoured. I imagined a shark at my feet every time I threw them out. I exerted myself with so much vigor that in a very short time I was alongside the flora. But I was in so exhausted a state that I could hardly raise myself over the side of the ship which floated alongside. No, I could hardly raise myself over the side of the boat. So there's a boat like tied alongside, which floated alongside the ship. I threw myself into the bottom, from which I was scarcely able to move for some time. After I recovered a sufficient degree of strength, I ascended to the side of the ship, and finding no one on the deck, I lay down in my wet clothes, and, putting my hat under my head, slept soundly all night. There was nobody on board. Of course, this is harbor duty, right? The fact that the sentinel on board the French ship was asleep, usually a harbor duty is very quiet, and here it's not like the French ship was alongside the quay or a wharf or pier or whatever you want to call it, so no, and they're in a friendly port, so they're really not worried about being attacked, and again, the privateer really doesn't have anybody watching out either. So he sleeps all night long on the deck, just lying there. When I awoke in the morning, I found I was unable to move in consequence of my clothes adhering to the pitch, which the heat of the climate caused to ooze from the seams in the deck. By using considerable exertion and rolling one way and the other, I at length liberated myself from my confinement and stood erect once more on the deck of the American ship. Now, why would you tell a story about gluing yourself to the deck of a ship by accident? Seems like one of those things that you might leave out of your memoir. Yeah, I got up in the morning and I couldn't move. I immediately communicated to Captain Johnson the cause of my absence and the situation of my companions, and their great desire to be again on board of his ship, and the hazardous undertaking I had accomplished to give him information of circumstances. Captain Johnson immediately sent an officer with his boat and demanded the release of his men. The captain of the French 74 gave them up and made many apologies in the polite manner of a Frenchman. For the mistake was made in the impressing of his friends, the Americans. Yeah, you better believe it. So it wasn't until this particular reading that I had, I've never really done any research on other navies, like other than British and American naval customs. So Americans never did impressment that I know of in the time period. Everybody was volunteer, whether it was obviously a privateer in this case, or even in the military. They didn't just round people up and shove them on board, Shanghai them as it were, what it would be called later on. But the British did that a lot. There were supposed to be certain rules about who you could impress. At least in the Napoleonic era, they were in theory they were supposed to have knowledge of the sea, and how do you prove that? But if they had tattoos that obviously looked naval, or they were working in naval kinds of situations, they just scoop them up. But they just basically took anybody sometimes, and same thing during the Revolutionary War. But here we have the French doing something similar, and in a foreign port, no less. I could, at least, it might be a colony or something, but there's the rules change for the British when they're in a foreign port. It's like, well, I can't take them in the foreign port, but I can go to ships right outside of the foreign port, and if they're a British ship, I could take people out of them or whatever. But this seems very questionable, a very questionable practice here by the French, but I don't know what their rules were. Thus I had the satisfaction of being the instrument in restoring my countrymen to their ship, and of finding myself safe in the protection of our excellent commander. Having taken in our loading of sugar and everything being ready for sea, and here it is, it's a privateer, but it's doing double duty. They're hauling goods too. And everything being ready for sea, we hoisted anchor and set sail about the middle of May 1782. The first few days after leaving the Cape, we had but little wind, and afterwards we made good progress and continued on our course without interruption for about a fortnight, when we fell in with a British brig from Liverpool bound to New York. We took possession of her, and putting an officer and a prize crew on board, ordered her for Boston, where she arrived. I afterwards received $30 as my share of prize money. So there we go. He basically didn't have to do anything, and he got his $30 share. I mean, his regular month wages were $10, so it was a very small prize. It was a brig, so it wasn't huge. Doesn't sound like it had any great volume of goods on board, but hey, he received his share. Now, interesting how how the shares found him, at what point he was paid. That'd be an interesting story. Usually that's with a very military ship, and so you're still serving on board when prize money comes through, and so it gets to you. In this case, maybe he was still serving when the prize money got to them. We continued on our voyage, and in 8 days after, we captured a large ship bound to Quebec, loaded with munitions of war and clothing for soldiers, a very valuable prize. She was ordered for Boston, but, unluckily for us, she never arrived there, being afterwards recaptured by a British ship of war off the banks of Newfoundland. Had she arrived safely at Boston, my share of the prize money would have amounted to a considerable sum. But such is the life at sea. It was nearly 3 weeks after when we arrived off the coast of France, and having taken a pilot on board, our ship was carried up the Garonne to the city of Bordeaux, where, on account of the rapidity of the current, she was moored both head and stern. Our ship was soon unloaded and stripped of her sails and rigging as preparatory to her being laid up till orders could be received from Boston. Part of the crew were paid off and discharged. The remainder that chose were permitted to remain on board upon small wages. Captain Johnson hired a house in the city, where he lived with his servants in a style becoming the dignity of a commander of a fine American ship. As the Flora was a fast-sailing vessel, our captain was in expectation of receiving orders from home to fit her out as a cruiser, in hopes of having another cruise, and anticipating an abundance of captures, with the natural consequence resulting an enormous amount of prize money. I was willing to remain in the ship with the expectation of being one of her favored crew. We remained at Bordeaux about 9 months, and I began to grow impatient at not receiving, everyone began to grow impatient at not receiving any direction from home respecting our future operations. When we arrived at Bordeaux, we found in the harbor, which was very capacious, 500 or 600 vessels. Wow. Bearing the flags of various nations, among which our stars and stripes held a conspicuous place. As we had but little work to perform on board of the ship, much of our time was spent on shore, with the improvidence characteristic of sailors, our money was spent freely, and in a few days, almost every one of the crew graced his pocket with a watch, from which a formidable chain was suspended, and to complete the equipment, adorned his head with a new hat trimmed with a broad band of gold lace. When we made a visit on shore, we were very careful to return to the ship before dark, partly on account of the patrol that paraded the streets at night. I wonder why. But principally in consequence of the danger of being on the river after dark. The current of the Garonne was extremely rapid. With the help of the tide, we ascended the river to Bordeaux in 3 or 4 days, anchoring every time the tide ebbed. The tide rises twice a day to the height of 4 or 5 yards. That's a lot of tide. And the velocity of the current sometimes exceeds 3 yards in a second. That's very rapid. Bordeaux, from its commerce and importance, ranks among the first towns in the kingdom. And its harbor is capable of containing 1,000 ships. One night, a number of our crew, after having spent a day on shore, attempted to return to the ship after dark. The boat pushed off with 4 oars, directing her course for the head of the vessel. She arrived at the starboard bow and was crossing it so as to bring up on the larboard side when she unfortunately ran upon the cable and was immediately drawn under the ship. A boat was let down as soon as possible, and all the men picked up but one, who was drowned. The boat floated off, but was found the next day and brought back to the ship. Having visited nearly every part of the city and seen all the wonders of the place and spent nearly all our money... Wait, let me go back. Remember the group of men he was with, people serving on the flora, and there were 4 or 5 of them that were taken captive by the French, or I don't know if captive's the word for it, but impressed. The men who were impressed, these were sailors, experienced sailors, part of a privateer, and he was the only one who could swim. So, these guys that their ship, their boat it hangs up on the cable, the rope that holds the anchor, and the boat flips over, and they're in the water, and one of them drowns. I mean, the water's pretty rapid. Even if he was a good swimmer, he might have drowned, but more than likely, he wasn't a swimmer at all. Why sailors, and I don't know, there's a lot of sailors in that time period. Some of them sort of disapproved of the idea of knowing how to swim. Having visited nearly every part of the city and seen all the wonders of the place and spent nearly all our money, we began to grow tired of our monotonous life and were desirous of being engaged in active service and of returning to our native land. 12 or 15 American vessels were laying in port, waiting for orders for home. Among these, I recollect a large ship was commanded by the renowned John Paul Jones, in whose service the American seamen were desirous of engaging. We began to grow impatient with our long stay in France and became anxious to return home. Next chapter. And as soon as put and sorry. It's probably time here. Maybe this will make it easier. What do you think? Look at that. And an end was soon put to our anxieties upon this subject. Early in the spring of the year 1783, news arrived of the peace, and that Great Britain, after a contest of 7 years, had acknowledged the independence of the United States. This news ought to have produced as much joy and satisfaction among the Americans in Bordeaux as it did among our fellow countrymen at home, but this news, so highly prized in the United States, produced much misery and distress among the seamen in foreign ports. A small number of them only were necessary to navigate the ships upon their return, and the remainder were of course discharged and left destitute of means to enable them to return to their own country. He considered himself fortunate who could obtain a passage home for the labor he might perform without receiving any compensation for his services. Our excellent Captain Johnson made great exhortations to produce passages for those of his crew whom he did not wish to detain till he received orders respecting the future destination of his ship, who were anxious to get home. There happened at this time to be on a visit to Bordeaux the captains of 2 American brigs lying at Nantes, bound for Boston, who were in want of hands. These gentlemen wished to obtain 16 or 18 American seamen, and Captain Johnson kindly offered to recommend me among that number. We engaged in the service of these captains and made a bargain for the captain of a French lugger to carry us to Nantes. We immediately repaired on board and proceeded slowly down the river, as the current is so swift that it is necessary for a vessel to go down the river stern foremost, dragging an anchor all the time from her bows to retard her too rapid progress. And you would think, it's like, wait a minute, I mean, why wouldn't you, what's wrong with going fast, right? But the problem is, if the water is going fast, and the ship is going just with the water, and not faster than the water, then the rudder has no bite. And so there's no way to steer the ship, except possibly with your sails. So, you could, but you can't rely on that, right? So you can use that probably if you were cut loose, if your anchor just, broke free or whatever, that's probably, and you didn't drop another anchor to do the same thing, you would try to steer with your sails. But it's very easy to run aground, you're not piloting it, and treacherous. So, and if you got everybody on board who can't swim, so they're dragging this and kind of dragging them while they have, that allows them to steer the ship so the water's cutting and they would use their rudder and they could move the tail of the ship one way or the other. We were nearly 3 days in getting down the river and about as much longer in our passage to Nantes, which held the second rank after Bordeaux as a commercial city, and it is on the right bank of the Loire. I don't know how to pronounce that French river. It is admired for the regularity of its streets, the elegance of its public buildings, and the magnificence of his quays, i.e. piers. The verdant banks of the river and the many islands scattered in different directions give it a picturesque and beautiful appearance. After our arrival, we took lodgings at a boarding house for a few days. I wonder why they don't just go on board the ship where they would be able to sleep. But until everything was arranged for our reception on board the brigs. Maybe the brigs aren't ready for them. In a few days, the vessels were loaded and ready to sail. We weighed anchor and set sail in April of 1783. We were 2 days in getting down the river, anchored for a few days at a town situated on the left bank of the river, about 3 miles below Nantes, and we then weighed anchor for the last time with a joyful ye ahoy, like ye heave ho kind of thing, but it's yo ahoy, and set sail for our native land, a land of freedom, where I anticipated with great emotions that cannot be described the pleasure of meeting with the relations and friends from whom I had been so long absent, and where I hoped to enjoy the sweets of liberty without anything quote, to molest or to make me afraid. I had endured much hardship, encountered many dangers on the ocean and upon the land, and I trust that I had felt grateful for the support and protection I had experienced. After all my wanderings, I found that I coveted rest in my dear native land more than all other things. And in the morning of life, as I was then, full of health and strength and buoyant spirits, the idea of once more seeing home gave so much animation to my feelings that I was enabled to perform my duties with a degree of alacrity. We don't use that word enough anymore. Alacrity scarcely equal to any of the crew. Look at that. He's just that excited about getting home. Every little service I could perform was a pleasure to me, as I was conscious that it helped forward my onward course to the object of all my wishes, home. Our voyage was a pleasant one, and nothing uncommon occurred till we arrived on the American coast, where we fell in with 6 or 8 British ships bound for England. Their decks were covered with the well-known redcoats who had survived the attempt to conquer our country. As our flag of stripes and stars, I like that, as our flag of stripes and stars was conspicuously displayed, they knew that we were Yankees with whom they showed no desire to continue an acquaintance. Our captain hailed them to know whence they were from and whither bound, but no answer was returned. Again he repeated his question, but his Yankee curiosity was not gratified. He once more put his trumpet to his mouth and roared with a voice like thunder, "Go and be blank. We neither love nor fear you." Our course was directed to Boston, and shortly after our captain's friendly salutation, we anchored in Nantasket Roads, and in a few days arrived in Boston. I stepped ashore on Long Wharf in the latter part of May 1783, after an absence of about 3 years. As soon as I could get released from my vessel, I visited my brother James at Mr. Tuckerman's, where he had lived during my absence, to obtain information respecting my good mother, my brothers and sisters. And from him I received a pleasing intelligence that the family were all in good health, but that my mother had given up all hope of ever seeing me again on the earth. While walking over Boston Neck to Roxbury, where my mother still resided, my brother and I arranged a plan to introduce me to my mother as a sailor who had just arrived from a foreign port, where he had seen her son Ebenezer and had some interesting information to communicate concerning him. You know, this isn't nice. This is just not nice. We arrived at the house, and I was formally introduced in the manner proposed. Time, hardship, and exposure to various climates had produced such an alteration in my personal appearance that it was no wonder that the eye of maternal affection did not recognize me. The good old lady received me very kindly and manifested all of the interest which is natural for a mother to feel towards one who had seen and conversed with a long-absent son. After having conversed with her for some time and endeavored to answer a multitude of questions which soon grew too minute for my ingenuity to invent answers satisfactory to her, I could no longer conceal my impatience to make myself known, and exclaimed as I arose to embrace her, "Mother, don't you know your own son?" I'm telling you, that is just... No, I would never do that to anyone. Her joy may be more easily imagined than described. I was at home. The alternate hopes and fears that had so long agitated her mind were now all over. She saw me alive and well. It was sufficient. She was satisfied and happy. She shed tears of gratitude and joy, and we both blessed God that we were permitted to be united in a family circle once more. My 4 brothers and 3 sisters, as well as my mother, were all anxious to hear me relate my adventures, with which I gratified their curiosity as soon as I was able, and which produced many exclamations of fear, of horror, of amazement, and joy. I want to relate this idea right now. It's in my head, and that is, if I had to, so I don't know exactly when, I don't remember exactly when he's writing this, but didn't he say something like 60 years or something like that? If I had to relate recollections that were that old, there's no way I would be able to say, oh yeah, when we started sailing for France, you know, there were 3 or 4 days that were calm, and then we had good weather, and this happened, that happened, right? But you got to remember that he is relating this. He's telling these stories right away. So he just gets back. He's there with his family, and so he relates this story. And since he's relating those stories, he's cementing those stories in his own mind, and he's telling them to other people in the future. So it's not a hardship to recollect these things because he's implanted those memories. We, you know, it's like, oh, remember that time you went to whatever? And I can remember the stories that I told from right after I got back from those things, right? But I can't remember the other things that happened because, of course, I didn't relate them at the time. So it's important, if we want to remember things, to tell those stories to other people so that we will be able to remember them in the future, or else they will vaporize in our memories. My story was related at that time to all my, so he's going to go on and explain this. My story was related at that time to all my acquaintance, and it was been so often repeated in the course of my long life that all its incidents are so strongly impressed upon my mind that at this distant period I can bring them up in my thoughts with all the freshness of recent transactions. Well, I guess I didn't need to tell that story. He just did. While I was on board of the ship Flora in the harbor of Cape Francois, I wrote a few lines to my brother informing her of my escape from Jamaica, etc. And this was all the information she had ever obtained concerning me, excepting a knowledge of the fact that of my having left the Old Jersey prison ship and enlisted in the British service, which of course he only did under duress, and he escaped right away. A circumstance transpired during my absence, highly gratifying and flattering to my feelings, as it served to show me that the poor wandering boy had friends at home who manifested a lively interest in his welfare. Before I enlisted on board of the Protector, I had recommended myself to the notice of many respectable gentlemen who were customers to my master, and have reason to think that my services were acceptable to them. These gentlemen had received information of the manner in which I had left the prison ship, and had acknowledged enough of my character to conjecture what my motives were for such proceedings. In other words, that he wasn't joining the British. They had likewise heard that I had been carried to Jamaica and was performing garrison duty there. A subscription paper was carried around for the purpose of raising a sum of money sufficient to purchase my discharge from the British. The names of the gentlemen who evinced the kindness of their feelings towards me by the liberality of their benevolence I shall ever remember with gratitude, and as they continue to be customers to my master after my return, I am able, at this remote period, to pay this humble tribute to their memory. They are as follows: Colonel Joshua Davis, Deacon Caleb Davis, General Amasa Davis, Captain Robert Davis, Ephraim May, Samuel May, Colonel John May, Edward Tuckerman, Captain Nathan Curtis, William Allen of Dorchester, subscribed 2 guineas. Ebenezer Wales, goodly amount of money. Ebenezer Wales, Ebenezer Dorr, Joseph Dorr, and many others whose names I do not remember. All of the above named gentlemen are numbered with the dead, and I trust or enjoying the high reward which is promised to those who practice deeds of love and benevolence on earth. The money thus raised was entrusted to the care of a gentleman named Perry, then living on Jamaica Plain in Roxbury, and who was about to sail to the island of Jamaica. My letter to my mother from St. Domingo arrived before Captain Perry sailed on his voyage, and rendered unnecessary the execution of this benevolent intention for my liberation. No act of kindness which I have ever experienced has impressed my mind with more heartfelt gratitude than the generous act I have related, and whenever I have met the descendants of my benefactors, some of whom now reside in the southern part of Boston, they have had my secret but sincere wishes for their prosperity and happiness. I returned to the service of Mr. Bosun, and remained with him till I was 21 years of age, when I established myself in business in my native place, where I have remained to this day. I commenced the business in the practice of the trade I had learned, but after a few years I relinquished it and opened a store for the sale of crockery, glass, and hardware, in which business I continued till the year 1837, when, finding my infirmities, especially my deafness, increasing, I thought it was time to quit all active employment and to ride at anchor the remainder of my days. And there we have the ending of the adventures of Ebenezer Fox during the Revolutionary War. A tremendous account, interesting in the minuteness and the kinds of adventures he has. An interesting read. This is one of the books that we have published. You can find it online at archive.org. Personally, I like paper books. I don't really care for reading PDFs, so it's just me. But I think there are studies that have been done that reading on paper is better. I remember books. I remember pieces from books, so it's like my job, right, to remember things that are in books. And generally, I don't have a photographic memory, at least like a perfect photographic memory, but I generally can think, oh yeah, I read that in a book, it's this book, and I believe it's in the first third of the book, and it's down on the page on the right-hand side, right, or something like that. So I can go back and reference the book and find it. Now, usually it's easier and quicker for me to look at an online version of it and then just do a word search inside the book. But it's also handy when I don't have that sort of tool available to say, yeah, I remember what book's at. I'm pretty sure I know where it's at, right? And if I'm doing that with an online book, of course, that's not there. All that is lost. But with an online book, you have different tools for searching. So that's my experiences with that. I really enjoy these adventures. Sometimes for their normalcy, even when they do have crazy adventures, they're not, it's just like things happen to them. And it's not because they're extraordinary, super strong people or super smart people, but they realize that things are happening to them, and generally, like in a book like this, or like, I thank God that He helped me with this or that, which is typical. The time period certainly not typical today. I don't know how people interact with those stories today. I'm not sure too many people, write their memoirs in the same kind of a way people do in the 18th century. Maybe we ought to do that more often. Maybe there needs to be a John Townsend memoir. I probably couldn't remember all the things that happened to me, so it would be a really short one. I think I did a YouTube channel one time. Anyway, I want to thank everyone who has come into the Nutmeg Tavern today and helped us out with being in the chat. Of course, being a participant in the channel. And participating other way. I specifically want to thank people who super chat and people who are members of the YouTube channel. Thank you for that kind of support. Also, the wonderful supporters we have over on Patreon and even Townsend's Plus. Some people still support us in that way, and who knows, there might be some interesting news on that front. I'm not sure yet. Also, we have this wonderful store online, townsends.us. You can get Nutmeg Tavern merch, you want a really cool Nutmeg Tavern mug, or you're interested in things like tricorn hats, or you're interested, you're a budding reenactor. We got all kinds of reenacting supplies, breeches and waistcoats, and you need a horn and spoon, you get a horn and spoon. Who knows what you'll be able to find over on our website, so I encourage you to check that out. Great fun place to, maybe you're just interested in seeing the kind of strange stuff that is for sale online. Our store is one of those places where you'll find strange stuff. So thank you so much for your amazing support. Thank you for coming into the tavern today, even if it's live or it's a couple of days later, whatever. I want to thank you for your encouragement and your great care of us. I hope you have a tremendous